Hi, my name's Yoriko, Otomo, Director of the Global Research Network. Welcome to the online launch of our think tank. You can head over to our website, www.grn.global, to have a look at the work that our junior fellows and fellows have been undertaking. The GRN is committed to open research that recognizes first and foremost that we're all deeply interconnected and that our work impacts not only the other, but the world at large. And so to mark our launch, we're holding this live streamed panel discussion with some wonderful academics. We've got with us today Dr. Raza Saeed, Assistant Professor at Warwick Law School in England, Dr. Caroline Godart, feminist philosopher, author, and Assistant Professor at INHESJ in Brussels, Dr. Alexander Stingl, Chair of the Scientific Committee for the project Juridifying the Anthropocene at the CNRS-INHESJ Research Programme in Paris, and Dr. Heather Morgan, social scientist at the University of Aberdeen's Institute of Applied Health Sciences in Scotland. Hopefully, if she's able to join us, there is a big time delay. Hopefully commenting on the panelists' discussion will be Professor Greta Gard, writer, scholar, activist, and documentary filmmaker based at the University of Wisconsin River Falls in the US. So the focus of our chat today will be COVID-19, not least because this pandemic has been the most socially transformative event of our generation, and because we're still in the throes of the crisis, which has been all-consuming for every single one of us. It's particularly important for us as academics to take time to reflect on what the impacts of the pandemic has been, and to take this precious opportunity while the world is still in a kind of interregnum to put in motion the groundwork for transformative change. To quote Rebecca Solnit in her recent Guardian article, "The wave of privatization that has characterized our neoliberal age began with the privatization of the human heart, the withdrawal from a sense of a shared fate and social bonds. It is to be hoped that this shared experience of catastrophe will reverse the process." Okay, so shall we begin with Raza? You've recently written a piece for the Critical Legal Thinking site in the COVID-19 called "In the COVID-19 and the Continuity of the Familiar" that rings for us a warning bell. And I was wondering whether you'd mind summarizing for us the argument you make there.
All right. Thank you, Yoriko, and also thank you to you for organizing this session and bringing us together. The critical legal thinking piece was just a call to engage in the wider discussions around the pandemic. So I should clarify where I'm coming from. So I work in social legal studies and primarily in the context of post-colonial countries, which brings me to talk about development and issues of human rights and patriarchy and so on and so forth. So I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a sort of medical specialist. What I look at and what I think this group is more familiar with is the interaction and the interplay that societies and individuals. That's what I was trying to make sense of. That. Okay, so we have these discourses and these narratives that the pandemic is either taken with this idea that it has changed everything. It is something that has, as using your word, the transformative potential of the pandemic, or on the other end of the spectrum, we have these takes where people and even some states are saying that it's nothing new, that we should just brush it aside. And for me, the logic of the interplay between these two extreme positions is more or less the same, which is that we've been posed with a challenge, and the only thing that is available to us is the tools and the prejudices and the techniques that we've already mastered and sort of made use of, for better or for worse. And that's what I was trying to get across in the piece. And unfortunately, many of these things haven't changed significantly in the last month or so since the piece's publication. So just to give you an idea as to what I'm trying to say. So for me, the operative category of the pandemic is still the demos, the people. And along with the structural inequalities, along with the ideas, the notions that the people have, the structures and the boundaries that the people have within states, outside of states, between different nations, and so on, still remain. So, pandemic, all for me that it's doing is that it's either accelerating some of the trends that we have been seeing emerge in the last few decades, or the pandemic has it's slowed down, but not perhaps created a new world as of yet that we would hope for. And this is something that we see in a variety of different categories. So, for instance, I speak about sovereignty, nationalism, and populism. In terms of the reaction of many countries around the world, perhaps not all, we see the politicians and the states have tried to use the same populist card, as if dealing with the pandemic is about electioneering, about appeasing people, about getting them on board. They've tried to appease the voters by downplaying the crisis. They've radically shifted their policies once the public opinion has changed, although in some cases the damage has already been done. Some have blamed this on minorities. Some have blamed this as a Western conspiracy. Some have blamed this as an Eastern conspiracy, depending on where their ideologies lie. And this is something that we've seen in the last couple of decades at least. And it is once again feeding into the strengthening of borders. It is feeding into the sovereign assertion. It is feeding into the idea of the sort of nationalistic fervor that has been there for a few years. Now, this continuity we also see in the individualization and the socioeconomic and political disparity. So, one of the key issues for me around the discourse in the academic on this pandemic has been that people have used it to say that it's a great equalizer. It levels all the boundaries because the prime ministers and their partners and A-list celebrities are getting it, and the poor people. Yes, but the socioeconomic disparity comes into play in terms of healthcare, comes into play in terms of exposure. Uh, there are those who provide social care or healthcare. There are those who have to provide grocery stores with the necessary supplies and so on. And they don't have the luxury to disappear into their second homes abroad until this is over. At the same time, the healthcare provided between countries, the healthcare provided to rich people or elite in certain countries, that is also a barrier that will exponentially increase the risk. And some of it, as I said, has come to play, unfortunately, because we are seeing a disproportionately large number of minority ethnic individuals within the nursing and medical community, especially in the UK, being affected by this. And it's playing out in other countries as well. So this, once again, this continuity I see in the case of value as well, the economic and social value that we impose on individuals. So there is an immediate write-off in certain societies that the elderly are those who do not have, sorry to use the phrase, but economic value, which is why the saving of lives is being pitched against the opening up of the lockdown and bringing the economy back into action. And I understand that economy, yes, it's linked to, it's important for the daily wage earners to open the economy. I completely understand that. But there is something really problematic about using this cost benefit analysis when it comes to people's lives. That as of the economy on the one hand, the GDP and the growth and people's lives are the same thing. And we are using this as an ethical debate, which is completely problematic. And we see this again and again increasing in turn. And finally, the notion of biopolitics and surveillance in terms of strengthening the sovereign assertion, and quite a few countries using surveillance or this opportunity to increase surveillance and contact tracing and so on, which countries, it's quite unlikely, I mean, it may be sort of pessimistic view, but sometimes the states, the powers that they get, not really keen on giving them back. And so through all of this, my take is primarily comes down to two main points. One is that if we're talking about the solidarity networks, about changing something, about making a radically different world out of this opportunity, we'll have to do it consciously through our active agency rather than relying on the things that perhaps you have been doing and that you know already, which is where your session feeds into as well and plays in. And the other thing is that this, for me, is a warning for the climate disaster towards we are heading. And this will be multiplied many folds, unfortunately, and it will affect everyone. And many of us have been perhaps thinking that it will not affect us, or it will affect some people or some countries more than the others. And if this is a test case for that, for the most part, apart from a few countries, we're all collectively struggling. So we need to think a way out. So I'll leave it here for now.
Thank you very much, Raza. I hear you when you say that any change will have to be a very conscious one, and I'm hoping perhaps that we can reflect together on how the ways in which the globality of the crisis itself has maybe laid bare some of this nationalist propaganda that you've noted, and the propaganda machines that have been set in motion precisely because we're in an age where there's so much social media where people can compare the different rhetoric that's coming out and discuss it in a more democratic manner than has been that we've been able to previously, in previous generations. Caroline, I wonder whether you might have a perspective on Raza's article, or perhaps you'd be able to share with us your thoughts on what the impact of the virus has been on feminism in particular, as far as can be observed, at least from within isolation.
Yeah, so I can really only speak about Belgium and what I have noticed from, of course, my extremely limited perspective from my apartment. So on March 12th, which really feels like an eternity ago, I was invited to give a talk to open a festival on women's performing arts at a theater in Brussels. And I remember saying that we were in the middle of the fourth wave of feminism, and that we were going through this extraordinary moment, not only in Belgium and Europe, but all around the world. And everyone nodded and everyone felt very happy about it. And then the next day, the government announced the first measures to rein in the epidemic. And theaters, restaurants, and schools closed down, and feminism also appeared to be discontinued. Not only were all political and artistic meetings canceled, but the online activism that had been relentless for the past 2 years pretty much disappeared overnight. And that was actually very surprising to me, because the feminist movement in Belgium was very much at its height in terms of energy. There was a lot of eagerness to fight more and in even greater numbers. More and more women were becoming aware of the issues that were concerning them. And every second post I was seeing on my Facebook feed was about feminist issues. And then all of a sudden, literally from one day to the next, the whole thing plummeted. And of course, now I'm going to be talking about online activism. And my question is, why did it stop? Because this crisis would be an ideal moment to lobby for real action against domestic violence, for instance, for legislation that truly protects women and children, as this specific issue, as we all know, has turned into at least as big a worldwide crisis as the COVID pandemic itself. And with everyone online all day long, it would be a perfect time to flood social media with campaigns and videos and testimonies and petitions. But other than the occasional article, the movement as a whole appears to have vanished into thin air. So the question I would like to ask is why? Of course, there are many practical reasons. Women tend to be caretakers, and many of them simply don't have time these days. They're exhausted between looking after children and working. Women are at the front lines of the pandemic. They're the majority of nurses, care assistants, cashiers. In Belgium, at least, most doctors are also female. But the thing is that many of the people who have energized the feminist movement, at least in Belgium in the past 2 years, and especially in terms of online activism, are young middle-class women without children. So I think that there is also something else going on here, and I would like to explore what it might be. So when we study feminism, we often focus on the interior, right? We read a room of one's own, and we claim that the personal is the political. And we're also aware that every feminist has had to fight her first and most difficult fight in her own home against her parents and brothers and lovers and friends, often as a very young girl or a very young woman with no support or resources. And yet feminism as a movement, as opposed to a solitary war. So feminism as a movement began when women decided to go outside together in large numbers. Think of the French Revolution, the Seneca Falls Convention, women joining the workforce in World War I and World War II, lesbians creating cultures by going to bars, etc. So feminist dynamics finds it hard to thrive inside. And this is probably true of all social movements. But it is particularly true of the women's movement, because women are the group that has for millennia been stuck inside the home. And so for them, the first step of the revolution is actually to go outside. It is not for nothing that we always picture witches in nature. And I want to stress here that women being stuck inside the home, I mean that, of course, that, women were field laborers, for instance, but their capacity for movement was very, very limited. So they would go to 1 or 2 places, but wouldn't be able to really move around very much. Now, #MeToo began behind our screens, and maybe for a little while it gave us the impression that social struggles could now happen in the comfort of our living rooms. But the truth is that social movements never only take place on social media. And in normal circumstances, the latter is at best a forum, most likely just a spark. In reality, Me Too took place in cafes and universities and clubs and beaches and forests, etc., with women talking to each other about what had happened inside. So it seems that if the home is the place of women's most acute oppression, the capacity to leave it is the condition of their liberation. So what do lockdowns do to feminism? We find ourselves in the current situation unable to leave our houses and apartments if we are so lucky to have one and not to have a job that exposes us to the virus. But paradoxically, being confined entails that we have all become deprived of a home, because a home is at once a shelter from the outside and the possibility to leave and come back. A home that you cannot leave is actually a prison. And wherever you were around March 15th and in what company is now your unchanging fate for the foreseeable future. And I think that this is important for politics because political struggles depend on the capacity to imagine new worlds. The imagination is not a trivial thing for politics. It is the force that beats at the heart of every fight for social transformation. And without the faculty to dream of a different future, nothing can happen. In 1957, Gaston Bachelard wrote a gorgeous book called The Poetics of Space, about the home as a place that is necessary for the imagination. He argues that the safety and the solitude of nooks and corners and attics are indispensable matrices for the work of the imagination to unfold. There are the intimate physical territories that enable the existence of generative inner lives. But Bachelard talks specifically about homes, not about prisons. And here I don't mean to trivialize the horror of prisons, only to point out the necessary similarities with our current situation. Prisoners, although they live in one place, tend to find it really hard to dream because they are, like the millions of women who are confined at home with their abusers today, subjected to relentless emotional and physical violence. But perhaps more importantly for the work of the imagination, prisoners tend to find it hard to dream because the fecundity of time and space is taken away from them. They are tied to the monotonous days and a future liberation that seems remote and uncertain, as well as the inability to leave their present abode, as we all are today. So in order to dream, to imagine, most people must first feel alive in them the possibility of an elsewhere. Our imaginations tend to need to know that they can access the spaciousness of the outside to reinvent the world. And this is all the more vital for feminism that women's liberation has largely been conditional on leaving the home prison. Our feminist imaginations yearn for outside spaces, for those precious moments where the home is left behind and the world is met. But the current pandemic makes it very hard to imagine a different world, as it seems from the minuscule horizons of our four walls that the situation will drag on and on for a long, indefinite time. But the thing is that it will end, and sooner than our depressed hearts seem to think. In a few weeks, a couple of months at the most, we will be outside again. And hard as we may find it to fight for feminism inside our homes today, if we don't act, we will have wasted this unique chance to put domestic violence at the center of the social change agenda. I think feminism cannot really afford to let this crisis go to waste. We must learn to seize the moment and to turn this catastrophe into an opportunity. To use it to make women's cause not secondary to others, but more central than it was before. But so my hunch is that we can only do so by carving out a space in our lockdown lives for our imaginations to flourish. And so how do we do that? So I'd like to ask you to take seriously the following questions. What outer spaces did our feminist ancestors dream of, and how do they impact us? What are the inner landscapes? What are our inner landscapes, and how do they sustain us? What are the outsides that we need to dream of today in order to regenerate our political visions? And how can we make them collective and driving forces for change? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for your lovely and inspiring thoughts. Alex, I wonder whether you'd like to comment on Caroline's comments or Raza's summary of his paper from earlier, or perhaps on COVID-19 and the environment where Caroline left off, because I know that you've been involved in thinking about the Anthropocene in particular.
Okay. So, I mean, Caroline, first of all, I'm very, very moved by this, and it speaks to so many things I've been thinking about, specifically starting with the question maybe of abuse and reflecting on this, on our role as scholars a little bit. Because I think, I mean, I come in part also not only in the environmentalist or environmental humanities tradition, but also from the decolonial point of view, and engaged a lot of decolonial scholars in recent years and their work. And what I've found very important is that you start first by thinking about your own positionality. And my positionality is very clearly that of a European white men. And that means there are certain privileges I have, certain things that I do not necessarily see because I cannot see them unless I'm alerted to them, which is precisely what feminist thinking, decolonial thinking has done over the years so well, is just to make explicit the kinds of privilege that create a blindness to suffering, a blindness to vulnerabilities, a blindness to acts of immediate as well as structural violences. So with regard to domestic abuse, because I have known in my life a lot of people suffering from abuse as being children, women, but also men who suffer abuse in relationships in very, very different ways. And being locked up with the abusers at this point will only make the situation worse. It will make, for example, I'm thinking of teenagers who are experiencing their sexuality as deviating from the perceived norm, and who normally have at least enough space in often very repressive conservative households of exploring them somewhere, right? And now this freedom to them is gone, and they might actually suffer certain repercussions of maybe a violent parent, an abusive parent who's not accepting of them being so different. And it is no surprise that already we have seen in many places a recorded doubling of the reported abuses. But it also means we have to pay attention to the underreported, the non-reported abuses. And this is a role where scholars, academics come in, because we have a very good fine-tuned way of helping people see, of lifting also, especially this veil of silence people exert over the domestic space. We often know that something's happening, but we do not dare speak. So this is an important point about positionality as well, to say, in your position, what can you not see, but also what does your position allow you to speak openly about? So, and I think that is, we who are as academics, especially those of us who have jobs that are still fairly safe, and I'm actually not one of them, but I have a mid-range safe position at the moment. But we who have at least a kind of a safety in the system to speak and to be heard, we can alert people, not maybe to say, oh, I'm going to speak for somebody else, which is also a kind of a power move, but in alerting people to pay attention and to say, look, the domestic is just one veil, right? We draw over something to say what happens in here, we others do not speak about. No, we can lift the veil, specifically if there's somebody inside the home who wants to speak, who needs to speak, who needs somebody to hear. Sometimes it is saying, hello, I am the ear that would be available if you want to. Right? So this is one of the things we as scholars can do in a private as well as a public function. With regard to the environmental issue which you raised, I think we also have to think about, so if our cities, for example, are now changing as animals that used to hide are coming back in. I have seen a lot of people talk about this, the canals in Venice, oh look, the dolphins are coming back, etc., etc. But there is a danger in that too, because in a sense, the animals are further drawn into our domestic urban space. And especially now in spring, they will try and make this their home as well. But as we are moving back out again, we would have to look at the fact that we would drive these animals away by many of our actions, because they're not wanted in the city by industry, by administrators, etc., etc. So do we really want to have these animals here? A lot of people would say, oh, they're nice to look at when they are, what they say is in nature, right? Far away from us. And now suddenly they are here. But that will mean for those animals that try to make a home here, that will try to, at this point in time, also have offspring here in these domestic, for us, domestic urban spaces, right? As we drive them off come summer, we will maybe destroy an entire generation of several species by doing that. And these are things that, from the environmental humanities point of view, from the environmental studies point of view, we really, really need to be aware of, to say, so what kind of injustices, what kind of violences could we be creating as we move back into the spaces we have now abandoned? So these are, I think, two of the main issues where I can latch on to the questions that have just been asked. I want to address maybe also a few things that Raza has raised, because a lot of this has for me to do with also this question of economy and growth. One of the main crises we are currently seeing for a lot of people is they're out of money, they're losing their jobs. And I've seriously been saying for many years, we have been thinking about infrastructure, for example, as being our economy at the very basis, at the very foundation of everything is supposed to be the economy, whatever it is, big collective construct, this imagined construct, the economy really means, because that too can mean different things in different places, in different cultures. But we have, in a sense, fetishized it to be this very, very fundamental stratum, this very, very fundamental actor, this very, very fundamental thing upon which everything else rests, be it our healthcare system, be it our education system, be it whatever. But in truth, I think, and this is an argument I have been making in my last book, for example, it is the opposite. The economy really rests on the healthcare system, on the education system, on the logistics and information infrastructure we build. That's what the economy rests on. So we need to take care of these things first, right? We also need to take care, for me, knowledge includes things like culture. Be it music, and it doesn't have to be like just high culture. It can also be that, but having culture in your everyday that you are producing, that you are part of, that you are sharing. What we're sharing in communities is culture. We know from a lot of studies, by the way, that have been conducted, for example, in Baltimore, Maryland, with young people. And Baltimore, Maryland is a city which is, in a sense, notorious for, you know, high crime rates. There's a lot of stereotypes with Black people going on, solidified, for example, in a TV series, The Wire, etc., etc. But a lot of studies that have been done there have shown that young people who are given a kind of a cultural project which they are passionate about have a much higher chance in succeeding academically, succeeding in a job, succeeding in life happiness, and not falling into poverty, not falling into criminality, etc., etc. So culture is the very basis, knowledge is the very basis of society. And it's not only, you know, this higher academic knowledge, it is knowledge of things that we do together, knowledge that we can share, knowledge that we can discuss about. That includes everyday political knowledge. And at this point in time, we're not really discussing a lot, you know? We have, you know, filter bubbles, we have ideological divides, we don't have discussions with arguments, we're not really forming diversity in knowledge, which we would need. Which is part of this real fundament of society, which is also where generative potential, creativity, and all of that comes from. And I think this speaks also to this question of, so what is more important, lives or the economy? And more you see people come out and say like, well, now it's enough, you know, we need to go back to the economy. This in the US very strongly, but also in Britain, you can hear more and more people saying we need to reopen, right? Not really understanding what that would mean, that we would have a rebound at this point of infection, right? I mean, Germany is right now at this point in comparison where they can just about open up because they have this rate where one person on average will affect one other person. And this is at the stage where the German healthcare system has control over the situation on the basis how many hospital beds have they, how many doctors, how many ICU units, how many ventilators. Britain, for example, does not have such a luxurious healthcare system as Germany because they never planned for a pandemic, which we have been told could happen for the last 20 years since the first, at least since the first SARS in, I think, 2003-04. So these kinds of divisions need to find a different way of discussing. You know, we need to have discussions not about, oh, do we need to have, on the one hand, more economy or more saving lives, but we need to have a discussion in society, okay, how do we set these goals, right? What are the arguments for this and what are the arguments for that? And how do we as a society balance that? But that is not the discussion we're having. We're having very polarized discussions. And in this case, again, I think it is education systems, it is culture that can, in the long run, change and affect that. And I think for me here, that is the point where I want to speak about what can we do as academics? So first of all, I started with reflecting on our positionality. So that is very, very self-centered. But I think it is very, very important that that is something we start with is self-care, right? Because we often forget, and this is for the when we think about nurses and doctors in hospitals too, we need to start for them also with having them in a position where they can care for themselves first. Because if they cannot care for their own health, which again is far more fundamental than any economy, if they cannot care for their health, they cannot do their jobs. If we as academics do not care about our health, our sanity, our well-being, we cannot do our job as good researchers or good teachers. Right? So we need to understand that this is the same across the board. It is the same for the person who takes your trash away, right? If they do not do self-care, they're not able to do their job. If they're unhealthy, right? If they have a respiratory disease like COVID-19, where their lung is affected, they will not be able to do their job in the future because COVID-19 can scar the lung, right? So it works on this level too, right? It works for everybody the same way. So doing self-care is a first step. But you have to learn how to care for yourself, and that is something we can only do with others. So it's a very philosophical point of view, perhaps, to say, oh, care, you know, Foucault talks about this, Maria Puig de la Bella Casa talks about this, John Tronto talks about this. We can throw these names around, and they're actually wonderful people from whose works I've learned a lot, and I can only advise people to check out what we know about care. But practice care for yourself, practice care together with others with whom you learn about what care means, and it means caring about your knowledge, it means caring about your culture, caring about your health, together with one another. And this is where I think academics really seriously need to start, you know, with this concept of care. And I think that's a good place to stop before I keep rattling on as I want to.
Thank you so much, Alex. I love what you're saying about care, and our final panelist, Heather Morgan, has been working on some of these questions for a while, particularly on the digital shift that we're seeing in healthcare and in social care provision, as well as developments in AI and citizen surveillance vis-a-vis COVID-19. So Heather, I wondered whether you might like to jump in here and maybe respond to some of the things that Alex has been saying, or Caroline or Raza, and tell us a bit about your work as well.
Certainly, yes, thanks very much. To reflect on what each of the previous speakers has said and kind of tie it into what I'm going to say. Firstly, to reiterate what Raza said about this acceleration that we're experiencing at the moment. And this really relates to two of my main kind of areas of work, which are on digital health and also researching digital pedagogy. To think about what Caroline said about homes, being at home, of course, our homes now have become the places where we are maintaining our health, are caring about ourselves, whether that's through eating, exercise, sleep, mental health, and the fact that they have also perhaps become, in a sense, prisons, but how people have become maybe creative about how they're using these spaces in relation to health and education, I think is something that I'm going to reflect on. And certainly the final point there that Alex finished on, this concept of care for ourselves as researchers and teachers and what we can do as academics. And I think certainly in the areas that I work, but particularly in the education side, caring for ourselves as teachers, but also setting an example for the students who look to us as role models and as examples, and demonstrating to them a way of caring about ourselves during this, that they can then perhaps learn from, take from, and help themselves too, because many of our students, many of my students are still working remotely and are completing degrees under these very strange circumstances. So I think that's something to think about too. Something that I heard this morning on the radio from it was a pause for thought, a speaker. He cited a survey of UK, I think, citizens. I don't know what the sample size was, but only 9% said that they would return to normal, would want to return to normal after this. And I thought that was a really interesting statistic. I don't know how robust the survey was, but just thinking about, you know, how many of us would actually return to normal. I don't want to frame this in a sort of doom and gloom kind of way, but to really sort of think about some of the challenges and how we might overcome them. So to come first to my main area of research, which is in digital health. Interestingly, the World Health Organization published their first guideline on digital health almost a year ago to the day. But as Raza said, we've seen this kind of acceleration. And while I've been an early adopter and I suppose quite positive about the potential of digital health in my research, I've also taken critical social sciences and health sciences approaches to that research. So thinking about virtual platforms for engaging with patients and doctors, or between patients and doctors, the use of apps, digital health apps, and wearable devices. I think that there have been lots of opportunities, and I'm being very, very excited about their potential, you know, devices, of platforms, of technology, now, the technologies that we have, but also in the future. But of course, these digital health opportunities also present challenges. So for example, at the moment, we're seeing many face-to-face services and contacts being reduced, and these might be negatively affecting those with long-term conditions or managing conditions themselves, where they don't have face-to-face contact with a health professional at this time. So many face-to-face services have been reduced or cancelled. Some have been replaced with virtual consultations. But you know, that's not really the same. Of course, this can lead to inequalities, can exacerbate some problems that people have around either accessing technologies or using technologies, or engaging even. You know, if people have some anxieties about using technology and suddenly thrust into this world of having to use a digital platform to engage with health and health services, this can be really quite disruptive and disturbing for people. And this has happened rapidly, where people are expected to be able to use technologies. And this is both on the health and social care provider side, but also on the patient or client side as well. So people might not necessarily have the digital literacies or self-efficacy to be able to suddenly use these technologies in the best way possible. And education and training has been lacking. We've seen some innovations happening in a range of areas in relation to both physical and mental health. But these have been happening in quite small studies and clinical trials and those kinds of contexts. Some services have been gradually moving to this kind of all digital platform, but very few were ready for this kind of a shift, which is interesting given that, you know, preparing for this, we have the technology, but people have been quite reluctant, I think, or perhaps a bit cynical or concerned about some of the other aspects, the negative aspects, particularly things like privacy and people's privacy of using online platforms, as we're doing today. So through Zoom, you know, suddenly we can all come together. Of course, these technologies can be really helpful, but we also have concerns around our own privacy, hacking, those kinds of things. And that's the same with, you know, an area of our lives like health, which can be obviously deeply personal and very sensitive. Having to do things online can create issues. But then, you know, there are some opportunities too. Apps in particular have been shown to be very useful for those suffering from different mental health conditions. And this is an area where digital health has been particularly promising, more so than in some other aspects of health. And of course now everyone really is experiencing a sort of sense of loneliness and isolation from friends, probably increased anxiety about going outside, when we go outside, how often we go outside, where we're going, how other people are behaving around us. So our expectations of social life outside of the house when we do leave for the reasons that we're allowed to leave, you know, we have this heightened sense of anxiety. And of course, many will be experiencing heightened sense of depression, being alone or being trapped at home. As Caroline said, you know, homes are not necessarily safe spaces for people. So there are all of these issues. And the other thing that is really, you know, a challenge here is we're not having the opportunity to evaluate robustly these technologies are being thrust in amongst the mix, but we haven't got a chance to pause to research and reflect in the ways that we would normally design research, for example, to evaluate. But I do think there are some exciting opportunities at this time that we might move to, we might establish new ways of providing services, engaging with services, and use technology positively. It might be that we can find new ways of engaging with health. And in particular, I'm thinking, we've seen some good examples in the UK, the Joe Wicks daily workout. That's really quite exciting. It's brought together people doing exercise in the home. There's been lots on social media about exercise online, with friends, finding new and creative ways for people to do exercise together. But people are also finding that having more time for exercise, that leaving the house for exercise is a nice opportunity to get out. It's, people thinking about the daily walks, whereas perhaps they might not have time, or they might be thinking about standing up more, walking around more, counting their steps, sleeping better. There's been lots published around dreams and, vividness of dreams and memories of dreams being really heightened at this time. But people are reporting that they're sleeping longer, more in tune with guidelines. And I know, as someone who would have been sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, and now up to the 8, and I never thought that was possible. But it is. And also eating better, people being more creative, they're home cooking, they're being more resourceful with the ingredients that they have, and exploring more in that way. So I wonder if there have been some good things that have come out of this in relation to health. But thinking forward, I think, we won't probably return to normal even when the restrictions are relaxed. So digital will be emphasised in reducing human contact or minimising human contact. But I do think that this needs to be done well, taking into account the existing evidence, but also the emerging challenges and observations that we have from this period in time. Education and pedagogy, digital pedagogy. Now, I'm someone who, most of my courses are already online. I do mostly postgraduate teaching of health professionals, doctors, nurses, and public health, dentists, carers, people who are doing a postgraduate degree in how to do medical research. So many of my courses are already online. And are international. So I'm used to this way of working, and for that, at the moment, I am immensely grateful and very aware that I'm in this position. For me, I came to home working on the 17th of March, and the University of Aberdeen closed to students on the 13th of March. Everyone was sent home. But that didn't come without its challenges, although in many ways, myself and colleagues who were delivering online education were kind of ready for that, in the sense that our platforms were there and our courses are available online. That's not the most part of our teaching. We've got a huge community of students on campus, many of whom's face-to-face education was cut short by a couple of weeks, and they've had to complete exams online. They've had to finish projects, research projects online, as obviously many school children have had to move to a kind of online education. And that's brought about with it some challenges around access to equipment. For example, we've had to be very careful that, just because people are at home and they might be expected to have a laptop or a device that they have access to, that might be the only one in the home. It might be, that there are several people who are needing to access that device. Internet access might not be, as universal or as strong in certain places or for certain people, and we have to think about that. People might not have a desk, a seat to work at, a space in their home to actually concentrate and to do work. The library, going to the library might have been where they accessed equipment and resources. So we have to think about that, and the same for school children who are now fully online. Obviously, confidence is affected too, because some people who sign up for online courses will kind of think that they know what they're signing up to, have done online courses before, may be very comfortable with that way of learning. But for those who've had to shift to that as the new normal, that will bring about issues around confidence in using equipment, but also self-confidence about how you interact online. People who are perhaps not so up on social media or so keen on interacting through this kind of medium may be challenged. The other thing that's really struck me is the pastoral care aspect. So where you might meet with students in a class, or because you've got scheduled classes online, you might be checking in. How much actual pastoral care are we doing? I've noticed that in conversations with my students, we are focusing on that kind of caring about ourselves that Alex mentioned, and caring about others, and making sure that we are checking in on that. And of course, some students too, and of course parents of homeschooled children, are key workers. Many of them are still going to work. And in fact, I spoke with one of my students just on Friday there, and she's a carer, and she explained to me how she was feeling about the relentless work that she was doing as a carer, the shifts, but with no time in between for a debrief, a sense of rest in her mind. And I said to her, you know, you're going to be embarking on this project. It's a postgraduate research project which will be conducted over the summer under my supervision. But part of my supervision is not just about this research project. It's about, is she able to do this research project while she's working, while these demands, you know, I'm going to have to be looking out for, will this be a good break from her, for her mind to be able to do this research, or is it too much when she's already coping with death, essentially, and seeing that every day, all day, every day, in every shift she works. And that's something that I need to really think about and ensure that I'm providing the support that I can, but also making sure I'm able to signpost to the resources that our university offer to students, and being proactive about that. The other thing,
Heather seems to have cut out a little bit for now, so I might just jump in here to say thank you all for laying out such an incredibly rich set of ideas for us to have a discussion around. What I might do is to unmute our audience members now. I recognize many of them, and I'm sure that they will have some questions for the panelists and for one another. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Caroline, actually. Firstly, thank you all so much. That's really, it's really great to be able to take part. I'm Katrina Nirul, I'm in Cork in Ireland, and I wondered, Caroline, if one of the reasons for this going silent of the feminist activist community, not just in Belgium, I'm sure it's elsewhere as well, is, I mean, you mentioned the caring responsibilities, but do you think that there's possibly an extent to which we're all in a kind of shock? And this has been such a momentous change for everybody that there's a period of processing it and almost of trauma, and then of coming to terms. And what we will see, not just in the feminist arena, but perhaps in many arenas, is a much later, much slower processing of the actual implications and fallout of what we're going through now. And I think that would, you know, so it's maybe this going silent is a productive phase where people are actually coming to terms with the enormity of the change, which is accounting for the silence in some sense.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, and I think that's definitely part of the reason. What has surprised and concerned me is how silent the silence has been, which is why I think that it may have to do with something more than being in shock. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first week or the first 10 days after I became confined, I was pretty much unable to have a thought, you know, like I was you know, not terribly productive or able to function. So I'm hoping that we are going through a kind of period of gestation for for what will happen next. But part of me is very concerned that once the momentum is gone, it will be gone for a while. And because feminism happens in waves, right? And those waves die out. And usually they die out because of victory or backlash or other kinds of reasons. My concern is that this one will have been killed by COVID-19, and that we will not be able to find the momentum back when we are no longer locked down, maybe because a massive economic crisis will hit us and people will be concerned by the unemployment and other tragedies. Yeah.
just wondering if I could make just a little contribution, which is, as Yoriko knows, I'm a filmmaker, not an academic, and I have a sort of conduit to a place that often self-describes as the hood, which is, it's a physical location in that it's urban, but it's also a state of mind. And so they're impoverished communities with extremely high levels of criminalization and incarceration. And one of the things that I've observed on social media and through the people I know is the kind of proliferation of conspiracy theories, and that you know, these are people who've been lied to and excluded and locked up and so on. So they have quite a lot of evidence for the fact that they're not told the truth. And that one of the things that seems very powerful at the moment is this belief that the whole thing is a plot in order to have this vaccination program, and that the vaccinations will insert a chip into all of us. And I'm not quite sure what this chip is meant to achieve, given that we're all surveilled anyway, you know, through our phones and so on, but through some kind of control. And, you know, when I think it was Alex was talking about filter bubbles, you know, we, even in this panel, you know, we're all kind of on the left and talking about the same kind of things, you know, that this is a whole other kind of level of kind of reaction to what's happening with people being locked up and stuck in this extremely kind of paranoid state. And, I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts about that.
Well, I'm happy to speak maybe something in regard to the hood and conspiracy theory and vulnerable populations. I mean, first of all, specifically with regard to this question of, oh, vaccination leading, you know, we're being chipped or whatever. I mean, that is something that is a conspiracy theory that you would also find, and maybe more preeminently also find, among white supremacist movements in the US, for example, who are about the, you know, oh, the deep state, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this kind of nonsense. I understand with regard to control and surveillance that specifically populations of African-American people in the US have had this experience, and there's good documented work, for example, by Virginia Eubanks on why people are actively resisting in vulnerable Black communities to get their data stored somewhere digitally, or to participate in certain social welfare systems actively, because they're afraid of their data being misused. But that is also in conjunction with another experience, namely that the healthcare system is especially characterized by social inequality in a racial kind of way. Right? And we can see that with COVID-19 very, very strongly, that in the US, we already see it, Black people are affected far more harshly than white people are. And I'm wondering about populations in the UK and in France, whether or not we're gonna see it there also. That said, the healthcare systems in European countries are, of course, far more open to the population in general than they are to the US. But there is certainly a kind of distrust. But with the strength of conspiracy theories, you would find the kinds of conspiracy theories you mentioned far more active and intensive among white fringe people and right-wing extremists. And there's a historic reason for that, but okay.
Can I jump in?
Please do, yeah.
Please, question on what Alex said as well. That if we look at, so it's not an overview of the developing world, to speak, but if you look at the discourses that are emerging from certain countries, camps in South Asia, or even in some parts of the UK as well, there's this idea that what is being thrown at the people is forcing them to retreat into wouldn't say just the familiar, but into the boundaries of their identity, into the religious or other understandings that they have about the world. And when I briefly alluded to the notion of conspiracy theories, if somebody is interested in perhaps can do a bit more research on this, hopefully in the next few years, you can see that this same episode is being blamed on all sorts of groups and tangents within societies. So it is being blamed on minorities. So the notion of minorities being, use a very sort of crude phrase, minorities being impure in societies, that has been going on for a long time. And the link of disease or an impurity being brought into the society has taken some root in the general discourse across the world, very problematic. But also this idea that, okay, it's a conspiracy led by the East Asian bloc for economic dominance, or it's a conspiracy by the Anglo-American world so that they can sell off their vaccines. All of these are just strengthening the tropes that were already there. And it just forces people to perhaps go back to their view of the world that was already there, and it's not challenging them. So this notion of bias confirmation or whatever psychologists consider. And I would go back to what perhaps Alex said in his discussion as well, that what we are lacking is precisely this discussion on economy, on the sort of society that we want to build through a consensus. When we sort of pitch the political ideas against the economic ideas, against the social ideals, and try and figure out what's best for a society. But at this moment, I think it's the war of liberalism against religious conservatism in some cases. It's a war of feminism versus patriarchy in the others. It's about economy and hunger and free market against healthcare provision in the others. And there are all these sort of fault lines. And my worry, perhaps, I think going back to the experiences of some of the other places outside of Western Europe, is that these fault lines wouldn't go away that easily. And they have a real tendency to become ruptures for years to come if we don't tread carefully collectively.
If I might jump in there as well, perhaps on a more optimistic note, I wonder whether or not some of this sort of transformative potential is being fostered right now. I was reflecting the other day on how precisely because we cannot go to certain places, and this is a perspective from the human nature relationship, looking at it from a human nature dynamic, precisely because there are now places we cannot go, maybe it's a time where we can reimagine or dream intensely, as Heather said, the fact that there are places of wilderness, and there are places that are sacred, is maybe a word we could use, that there are places that are non-human. There are magical places, that there can be space now. We're making a space very slowly where we could begin again to think about what our position, to pick up what Alexander was saying about positioning, where we can reposition ourselves in this world. I'm just going to read out a couple of questions coming in from our YouTube channel. There is a question from Kate Cook, who says, could simple questionnaires or surveys be capturing and enriching our observations of what's going on and providing data to look at some of our questions? And I think Kate is a medical doctor who's interested in thinking about what behavioral changes are taking place. There's another question from Jonathan Barnes, who is one of our board members of the Global Research Network, who says, Alex's focus on self-care, discussion and diversity and knowledge suggests a root and branch transformation of school education. And he agrees, but would like to know how this transformation might begin. And maybe we could pick up on Jonathan's question first.
So if I am supposed to start, I will say, first of all, what it cannot begin with is with anybody saying I have the solution. And that is often a big issue with how we lead discussions publicly, is that people demand a solution, right? Rather than saying, okay, why don't we give this problem that we can, again, discuss seriously. What is the goal? We don't really talk about what is the goal of a specific aspect in society that we are seeing is currently transforming or that we want to transform. And I think to create a kind of climate where it is possible to have time to think, to have time to talk, and also time maybe to experiment a little. We're often thinking that, oh, if we do not give, especially in schools, and if we do not give all children right now the same kind of tools to succeed, if we do anything wrong, they will be destroyed for life. But children are incredibly flexible, so we can try things with them, and they will thrive on diversity. They thrive on the experimentation, right? And the truth is, we already have certain inequalities, social inequalities in the system. And I think experimentation sometimes can help us address those. I have seen this with experiments done in schools where physical education aspects were introduced, for example, into math lectures. And these were tried in schools that were in fairly poor neighborhoods in the US, for example, the Naperville experiment that people like John Ratty did, who's an expert on attention deficit disorder, and they tried changing there in schools that were not doing well, in schools that were very poor neighborhoods, with introducing physical education elements, which have been phased out more and more out of school curricula, but introducing those into the math classroom, into the language learning classroom. And all of a sudden, these schools went up, the students' achievement went up fantastically, right? So I think this is a climate we should start to talk about how we change it, how we bring maybe the arts back here, music back there, physical education back there, and integrate it more. And talk about, so what is it that we're doing here? And not be afraid that we do wrong by the children, but really say, okay, let's try certain things, right? And create a future for these children that's forward-looking, that's looking towards the diversity of goals, and it's looking towards a diversity of knowledge.
Thank you, Alex. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there. Unfortunately, I think people watching on YouTube aren't able to speak. I've just admitted to our room Kwabena Darko Akwamoa, who is, I think, in the process of connecting. He's a cultural anthropologist from Ghana. And he writes, he's of the opinion that indigenous solutions can be helpful in thinking through some of the problems that we're raising. And so hopefully he'll be able to join us shortly. And while we're waiting, I might also read out a comment from Lorna Cameron, who unfortunately has to run off to do some teaching now, but she said she'll be back shortly to see what we've been discussing. But her research, she says, is on the idea of interiority that's created by the intangible qualities of the architecture of courtrooms, I suppose, in particular. So she says her contribution might not be on point in terms of this discussion, but she wonders whether the transformative potential of the COVID-19 crisis might transpose itself through all of these overlapping experiential and pedagogical media into the social and cultural structures we all hold as common ground. And she said it's not a question as such, but an invitation to discuss it more generally.
Just jump into a couple of things. So one was the question that you raised about from one of our colleagues on whether the question is can be used to gauge behavioral changes. And those of us who perhaps have more experience with ethnography or longitudinal surveys would perhaps be able to contribute more. But I think it's, in terms of behavioral changes, it's perhaps too soon to gauge whether the changes that have been brought in are long-lasting or they're just sort of transitory, temporary responses to this challenge that has been posed. And one of the other things that this brings me to is this idea that while all of us perhaps say that there won't be any return to the normal as we knew a few months ago, most of us and most of the people around us cannot but wait to return to the normal, whatever that may be. And we're just trying to get back into what we sort of did on a day-to-day basis and reacquaint ourselves with the spaces outside. So in terms of the behavioral changes, I think perhaps it is an interesting idea, and a few months down the line, we'll be able to know more about it. And in terms of Lorna's question, so Lorna's observation with regards to the intangible architecture of courts, it's interesting to see that paradoxically, courts in the UK and in some South Asian contexts as well, for instance, they've been really slow to respond to this. Regardless of the idea that they're sort of imparting justice, they are trying to perhaps, in some cases, hold the governments to account. They're, some of the courts, even if we don't want to generalize, some courts have not been able to step out of their own ways of working in terms of how to engage with witnesses, how to speak to lawyers, how to collect evidence, how to go about cases that are already there. And this is sort of quite a worrisome moment, because if a court, for instance, is not able to change its own way of working on the basis of the challenge that is imposed, can we expect them to empathize with the people who have faced these radical challenges when it comes to resolving their issues? For instance, doing dispute resolution between students and universities, deciding on any issues and cases that emerge from this, but also the climate change cases that are on the horizon. And in terms of social legal scholarship and a call to legal scholarship generally, I think there needs to be more done in this regard, just to understand the working of.
I think you're quite right, Raza, and it's not just the courts, is it? I think it's parliaments as well, and other halls of power. It's hard to see whether or not there'll be any sort of increase in empathy from existing elite groups who have been able to shield themselves for the most part from the worst effects of the crisis. Otomo, I wonder whether you've got your tech working, and if you'd like to jump in with some of your comments from earlier.
Okay. So I was trying to look at trying to solve this epidemic from an indigenous perspective. For instance, here in Ghana, most people don't get to understand the scientific basis of what is conveyed in stuff. So they keep going around, they keep going into what they're not supposed to even do. So what are we doing to really, if informally educate? I mean, I'm not talking about the formal sector or the middle class, but the lower class, which is basically the majority of the population here. What are some of the things that people might suggest we do to be able to educate them about the scientific? Because in most instances in Africa, the science is not, we don't know the how and the why of the science, but we know it works. But we don't know the how and how. So how will you be able to explain to such people?
Can I maybe come in there? And this relates to both your and Raza's point. I think we really need strong leadership at all levels, and I think advocacy at all levels as well. So, you know, we have country leaders, we have ministers, we have that level. We also have the organisations we work for or are associated with, and strong leadership is crucial at this point in those people. But I think we can also demonstrate leadership ourselves and advocacy ourselves. As I mentioned, this is particularly for me in relation to care for students and demonstrating self-care and checking in with students and making sure that they are. But in terms of, you know, educate, reinforcing the points and being aware as well of different governments having different restrictions or giving different advice about what people should do, just reinforcing those messages and, you know, in every conversation and opportunity, just checking in with people, you know, reminding, but not in a sort of a heavy-handed kind of way, but just keeping the conversation, rather than having this kind of suspicion about what people are doing or judgmental, because I am finding that people are saying, well, I've been out once, or you know, or being very careful about how they talk about what they're doing. So I think people, you know, we don't want people to shy away. We want to engage, and I think leadership, strong leadership, but also advocacy at every level is really crucial.
Could I just jump in there, because I'm really struck by the discourse around strong leadership, particularly at this time, becoming exacerbated. So I read somewhere, it was a comment about how, you know, strong men love a pandemic in a way, they love a crisis. And we can see, you know, from the Belarusian premier denying that anybody in Belarus will get COVID-19, so that the population now have to resort to crowdfunding to protect themselves. You know, I think the discourse of strong leadership is one, like so many, that we have to be careful around. And I suppose that comes back to what Alex said at the start about, and many of you have mentioned, about being aware of the uneven distribution of impacts of this pandemic. So that if on the one hand, somebody's talking about how being locked down enabled them to discover new recipes or different ways of exercising, that is the position of privilege speaking. There are many families where there won't be enough money to put food on the table because of the pandemic. So I think we need to be really careful about how we frame discursively the experience, and that we've always sort of acknowledge these power differentials. And that's where I wanted, if I could just continue, because it's related to a point that Yoriko made, which is to do with the question of nature. You know, nature will have some great comeback because we're all sitting at home and the fish will swim up the canals in Venice and so on. And one thing to bear in mind there, coming from an environmental, humanities and eco-critical perspective, is that the virus is also non-human nature. So I think, you know, this moment of deceleration, there are some accelerations, but there's also a deceleration of our lives. We're not all flying everywhere. So there's less pollution, and we've seen those wonderful images coming out of India where the smog-bound cities suddenly have blue skies. So these look like positives, and we have to really beware the temptation to romanticize that seemingly recovering nature. And I think if we just keep remembering that the virus is also non-human nature, that will enable us to frame that in that sufficiently differentiated way. Because I think that really, when we talk about environmental impacts, one of the normals that can't return after this is an economic system predicated on infinite growth on a finite planet. That's the disaster we're heading for. The first speaker said it straight away. This is a test run. This is a dress rehearsal for climate change. And what the forces that are pushing us in that direction are the ones that have been forcibly ejected in a way. And what does that opportunity provide us with? And of course, again, that's very tricky to disentangle from a fallacious romanticization of some recuperating nature, which would be an illusion anyway. So how could we use this to rethink this notion that normal equals extractive global capitalism predicated on ever-expanding productivity, ever-expanding resource extraction and meaning? All resources, human attention, human libido, human affect is also a resource that gets extracted in this system, and towards ever-expanding consumption, which is trashing the planet. So that's the normal that we can now reset, or we might have an opportunity to at least adjust it and become aware of it in a new way. So that would be the sort of Anthropocene perspective on crisis as opportunity here.
Thanks very much. I think this might be a good idea to jump in and invite Greta Gard to join in with us. She's a writer and a scholar and an activist and documentary filmmaker based at the University of Wisconsin River Falls in the US. And Greta was going to try and join us earlier, but I think it was 4 a.m. where she is. So thank you for jumping in now. So one of the things I'd like to flag that she's been doing is taking leadership, and she's put together an environmental petition committing academic signatories to take action in light of COVID-19, because of course, as you say, Catriona, climate change is the big backdrop to what's happening with the virus. We're hosting the petition at the moment on the website on the Global Research Network homepage, and we're going to be adding a link soon to allow people to sign up and circulate it as well. Greta, I'm not sure whether you can hear us. Would you like to say a few words about the petition?
So the reason that I started the petition is because so often as environmental scholars and humanities scholars and eco-critics, our tendency is to write an essay about it or have a conversation about it. And we are less likely to examine our own ways that we can contribute to solving a problem, because we think, rightly so, that there are larger systems at work, and that the goal is to transform capitalism and industrialism and the first world oppression of the two-thirds world. And this is absolutely true, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't take smaller steps as well. And I'm so reminded of the second wave feminist slogan that the personal is political, that what we do in our own lives on a daily basis does make a difference. And the petition invites people to look at their own carbon footprint. In terms of their flight patterns, their transit patterns, and their food consumption patterns. This does not mean we're going to stop working to end capitalism and to get rid of people like President Trump, for example. But it does mean that it gives us an opportunity to have a mindful reflection on our own behaviors, because it's so easy to justify flying to a conference where we're going to speak about these important things. And so the opportunity to participate in a conversation online now, although that too has a footprint, is a reduced footprint. And so I'm circulating the petition among people who don't normally consider themselves the elite, and to look at the ways that we are in part a member of that group. I think that material feminism, of which I've contributed a bit, in its analysis of vital nature, which our last speaker spoke so eloquently about, doesn't also have an ethical system for looking at the ways that some kinds of vital matter have more standing and merit more consideration than other kinds of vital matter. There isn't a framework in material feminism and material philosophy really for looking at those ethical concerns and ethical standing. So I'm not sure how much of a tool it is for us at this particular time to measure suffering and to respond to it with compassion. And I hope everyone will look at the petition and see if it can be a tool for them. And right now, my email is the one for the contact because I'm adding names manually. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Greta. We're not going to put your email address onto the website, but we'll link your profile, your university profile, so that people can contact you that way, so that you're not inundated with spam.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Would anyone else like to jump in, or are there any final comments? Yep, sorry.
So because I think that we didn't really respond too well to Akwamoa's point. And I think that is something that is underlying a lot of what we've been talking about, because if we just take this distinction, global north, global south, for a second here, a lot of this discussion is the way it is led very much about the global north and the way that the problem is articulated in global northern concepts and frameworks. And I think Akwamo's question points for me to two things. On the one hand, like, how does this, however, involve and play out in the global south, and what can and should the global south, which is itself a problematic term, make it into this collective actor, contribute? Because, for example, South America and Africa are playing very little role in the media discussions, right? And if they do, it is mentioned that, oh, in Africa, millions of people will die because they get more COVID effects because of bad hygienic situation, which creates a stereotypical image of Africa, because it is not the same everywhere, right? In Africa, there's places that have suffered greatly from the after effects of the colonial era and the neo-extractive regime that the global north has implemented there. The whole disaster of developmental policies, et cetera, which we also see in South America. So we need to really, and this is an area of a lot of scholarship that's still needed to help, especially from these regions, to say, so no, here's the different diverse situations, and these are the places that need specific kind of help. These are the places that contribute in certain kinds of ways. And I think that is something where we really also, again, need to listen rather than talk. And then the question of solutions, and that brings this debate together with the climate change debate. If we take, for example, how are people locally phrasing and understanding that, as well as what kinds of solutions can they offer? For example, not just in this view of, oh, indigenous people might have these natural again remedies that we can use. Okay, this is also an interesting question, et cetera, but also in understanding what is going on. But very often local knowledge, local epistemologies are constructed as like, oh, they're really, really good for the locals. And if we can only translate that into a way so that they can then accept our resilience politics, our kind of neoliberal governance in translated terms, then it's fine. But we also need to accept that people could, from indigenous places, have frames of reference that are far more globally useful. Certain Inuit people have a concept for climate change, which actually means in their language, abusing the environment, right? Using the environment in terms that extracts too much of it, that exhausts it. And that is what their word for climate change means. So we can learn from there. This also brings with it questions of how can we integrate knowledges in place together? With regard to health, I think of the research Claire Decoto has done on HIV in South Africa, where she says it is the Western medical school medicine, Western medicine, is not exclusive to local medical thinking. There are ways how people, in her research on HIV, there people have brought it together, right? And we need to learn from that. And that speaks then to the question of leadership. There's so many different local leadership traditions, especially in Africa, especially in South America, amongst native people in Northern America, across regions of Asia, which, if we want to address this, we need to address who are the people who are considered leaders in their respective communities, and how and why. And how can we talk to them on the terms that are important to them, and how can we learn from them how leadership can also work for us by learning from them. And there's a lot of good scholarship, which we just need to digest and transform in ways that are understandable also here in the global north, without appropriating in unequal, unjust ways.
Thank you.
Can I say something? Can I add something to it? Yeah. I am very grateful that Alex has been able to espouse what I really meant to say. For instance, there's an issue with conflict resolution in Africa. We know the traditional way of resolving conflicts, right? So when you take an issue to court and there's a winner and there's a loser, in our context, we don't understand a winner and loser. We understand amicably settling an issue, greeting each other, and then having. So I think what Alex is saying is very important. We shouldn't lump all of us together like the globals are global north, and then one is reading each other. We should be able to, for instance, I'm looking forward to whoever you're going to reorganize, maybe organize another one on indigenous knowledge that we are going to talk and promote indigenous. Like for instance, for 10 years I've not been to the hospital. I take traditional medicine for 10 years. That is why I'm a cultural anthropologist. I've been here. I hold a PhD in cultural anthropology, and I understand Western medicine, but I don't take Western medicine. I only take traditional medicine. So there are instances whereby I'm very grateful that Alex raised this issue again. I think we should look at it over and over. We should make it a conscious effort to promote that in the scholarship of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Akwamoa, that's a wonderful idea, and I'd love to organize with you a panel as well on Indigenous scholarship, perhaps, and Indigenous knowledges, and invite back some of you to participate as well. It's been such a wonderful and rich discussion. I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to call it a close here. But thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience members for coming along. Thank you all for sharing your time and reflections. I think I don't pretend to know much about it, but the Buddhist spiritual practitioners and other spiritual practitioners tend to focus on two things that we have in common with other humans and with our communities and with other living creatures, and those are the breath and walking, moving. And every morning I throw open the window and take this deep breath of air that is very, very clean. It's air that I haven't smelt since my childhood. The smells I'm noticing now, I thought that it was a matter of age that I could no longer smell the world, but it turns out that it was just pollution. So I'm taking a deep breath every day and being immensely grateful for it. And when I think all of us are experiencing this, that when we go on our daily walk, as with our daily breath, we're experiencing something anew and deeply meditative and deeply reflective. And so not to romanticize it, but I think this is a transformative period. And to quote Rebecca Solnit, again, at moments of immense change, we see with new clarity the systems, political, economic, social, and ecological, in which we're immersed as they change around us. And we see what's strong, what's weak, what's corrupt, what matters, and what doesn't. And I'm so grateful to all of you for having highlighted really some of these key issues for us and the things that we can go on to reflect on throughout the day. And I'm looking forward to engaging in conversations with you all over the coming weeks and months. And it's exciting. Let's think about the things that we could do together as academics and as part of a global community to enact some change. So following today's inspiring and thoughtful discussion, I hereby declare the think tank launched, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.